I need you to understand one thing before I begin. My name is Alan, Dr. Alan Carter, and for 30 years, life and death were my trade. I was a cardiovascular surgeon, a man of science, an atheist. For me, death was simple. It was the end of brain activity, a switch that turns off and done. Darkness. End of conversation. I saw that switch turn off hundreds of times on my operating table. I got used to the sound of the heart monitor becoming a flat, continuous line. It was a final sound. Unquestionable. I held hearts in my hands literally. I felt the exact moment when life left a body. It was a biological event. Period. But I never imagined the day would come when my own switch would be turned off. And what I saw on the other side, what I felt, wasn't the emptiness my science predicted. And believe me, it wasn't the paradise that religions promise. It was something completely different. Something that human language doesn't even have words to describe. My life before the accident was a perfectly balanced equation, at least in my head. On one side, Dr. Alan Carter, the surgeon, a name that echoed with respect in hospital corridors. I'd enter the operating room and the world made sense. The smell of antiseptic, the incessant beeping of monitors, the weight of the scalpel in my hand, that was my sanctuary. There I was a god in blue gloves and a mask, who mended nature's faulty work. I was good. Maybe too good, and that certainty was enough for me. On the other side of the equation, there was just Alan, and Alan lived in an apartment that was too big, too silent. The white walls, decorated with anatomy pictures and awards I'd won, looked more like a clinic than a home. I'd come home and the echo of my own footsteps was my only company. I'd take off my lab coat, but the doctor's armor that I could never take off. My ex-wife, Sarah, used to say that. I remember the day she left. She stopped at the door, bags on the floor, and looked at me with a sadness I didn't know how to fix. "You fix everyone's hearts, Alan," she said, her voice choked. "But you forgot that you have one too." Those words stuck in me like a splinter no surgical forceps could reach. She knew. She saw the emptiness I tried to fill with long work hours and scientific papers. And the emptiness was real. I felt it. It was a strange hunger, a thirst that no professional achievement could quench. On the rare nights off, I'd sit in my leather chair, a glass of whiskey in hand, and look at the city pulsing outside. I saw millions of lives, millions of stories crossing, and I felt like a spectator outside a party I wasn't invited to. Why? I had everything, didn't I? Success, money, respect. What the hell was missing? I looked for the answer in my books. I read about quantum physics, cellular biology, trying to find the formula for happiness, the gene for purpose. But science, my only faith, was silent on these questions. It told me how the heart beat, but it didn't tell me why it was worth beating. I was a brilliant mechanic who understood every piece of the engine, but had no idea where life's road should take me. But what happened next on that rainy night was even worse. Or maybe better. I was about to find an answer. Only it wasn't in any of my books. It was on the other side of life. And I never, not in my most feverish delusions, could have imagined what awaited me. What do you think happens to a person who has everything but feels nothing? Leave your opinion here in the comments. And if you've ever felt like this, lost, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the stories I'm going to tell might change the way you see everything. That day began like any other. An alarm at 5 in the morning, black coffee, strong, no sugar, the smell of iodine and the cold white light of the hospital greeting me as always. I had a complex surgery scheduled. A man about 60 years old, his heart was a map of potholed roads. A triple bypass, routine for me, but something was different. It started in the operating room. Everything was going well. The chest open, the heart there, beating weakly in my hand. I was in my element, focused, but out of nowhere I felt a chill, a shiver that ran up my spine and had nothing to do with the room temperature. I ignored it. Focus, Alan, focus. A man's life depends on you. The surgery was a technical success. We closed the chest, vital signs were stable. But in the recovery room, hours later, he had a complication, a massive embolism. We ran, did everything. But the heart monitor began that slow and terrible descent. I was beside him, holding his hand, more out of protocol than feeling. And that's when the first thing I couldn't explain happened. He opened his eyes. Not to me. He looked at an empty spot on the ceiling. His eyes, previously clouded by pain, became clear. clear as crystal, and he smiled, a serene smile, almost happy. He turned to me, his voice a weak whisper, and said, "Don't worry, doctor, it's beautiful. Everything is connected." And then, the monitor became a flat line. The end. Everything is connected. That echoed in my head. Delirium from lack of oxygen to the brain, I told myself. A final and random synapse. But the image of that smile, that peace, it wouldn't leave me. Why did he smile at death? Later in my office, the second strange thing happened. I was signing some charts, pen in hand, and my hand had trembled. Not a tremor from fatigue. It was a violent, uncontrollable spasm that made the pen fly away. I looked at my fingers, the same fingers that hours before had sutured tiny arteries inside a heart. They were still now, but I felt a strange buzzing in them, like residual electricity. Stress, I decreed. Exhaustion. I found a scientific explanation, as always. But deep down, a little voice I didn't recognize whispered, "Something is wrong." But what happened next on the road was the final sign, the one I should never have ignored. Night fell with torrential rain, the kind that makes the world look like a blur. The windshield wipers could barely keep up. I just wanted to get to my silent apartment, have a whiskey, and forget that day, forget that man's smile, forget the tremor in my hand. I was driving on the highway about 80 miles per hour when an overwhelming sensation took hold of me. The same sensation I had when I was a child and woke up in the middle of the night, with the absolute certainty that there was someone in my room. You know that feeling? That primitive, irrational fear. My heart raced. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing, just rain and distant headlights. Even so, I was certain that I wasn't alone in the car. I felt a weight in the passenger seat, a presence. I should have pulled over to the shoulder. I should have taken a deep breath, waited for the rain to pass. But Dr. Alan Carter, the man of science, doesn't believe in premonitions. "It's fatigue talking louder," I said aloud, just to break the tense silence. And I accelerated. I accelerated straight toward the end of everything I thought I knew. Have you ever ignored a premonition and bitterly regretted it later? Tell me here in the comments. If stories like this make you think, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Because what I'm going to tell you next will challenge everything you believe about life and death. I accelerated. The engine responded with a low rumble, cutting through the curtain of water. And it was at that exact moment that the universe decided to give me a practical lesson. 2 points of light appeared out of nowhere in the wrong lane. White, furious, growing at an impossible speed. They weren't headlights. They were 2 suns on a collision course with me. The sound of a truck horn tore through the night, a metallic war cry that came too late. My foot went to the brake, but it was just a symbolic gesture, a last goodbye to the illusion of control I'd had all my life. Time stretched like a rubber band. I saw everything in slow motion, the steering wheel spinning in my trembling hands. The expression of panic in my own eyes reflected in the rearview mirror for a split second. I saw the metal of the truck's grill approaching, a chromium and hungry smile. There wasn't a profound thought. There wasn't a movie of my life passing before my eyes. My last thought as a man of science was ridiculous, almost comical. Inertia is going to be a problem. Then impact. It wasn't a noise. It was the absence of all sounds, swallowed by a single shockwave that vibrated through every cell of my body, metal screaming, glass turning into a rain of deadly diamonds. I felt a violent jolt, an invisible force crushing me against the seatbelt, and then a sharp white pain in my chest, a spear of fire, and then silence, a strange, heavy silence. I was trapped in the wreckage, the smell of hot oil and rain on asphalt invading what was left of the car. I tried to breathe, but something was bubbling in my chest. Blood. I knew that sound. I knew that feeling. My brain, the scientist inside me, began to narrate the process with frightening calm. Massive hemothorax, probable aortic rupture, imminent blood pressure loss, systemic shutdown in 3 minutes, maybe less. The pain began to recede, like a receding tide, leaving behind a cold numbness that spread from my chest. That's when Sarah's image appeared, her face sad at the door of the house. You forgot that you have one too, the heart. The one I never knew how to fix, mine, and for the first time I understood. It wasn't about arteries or valves, it was about the emptiness. And there, dying, I felt a regret so deep it hurt more than the twisted metal in my ribs. The darkness I had always predicted began to swallow the edges of my vision. The sound of rain became a distant hum. End of brain activity, the switch. That was it. So this is it, I thought. Darkness. But it wasn't darkness, it wasn't emptiness, it wasn't the end, it was a pause. I felt the last and lonely thump of my heart. It wasn't a sound, it was a sensation. Period. And with it, the weight of my body disappeared. The pain was gone. The fear was gone. Dr. Alan Carter, the surgeon, the atheist, the man in the destroyed car, he was gone. I was no longer looking through my eyes. I was no longer feeling with my skin. I floated out of the wreckage, not like a ghost, but as consciousness, pure and simple. I saw myself there, a broken doll hanging from the seatbelt, and I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, just a strange and peaceful distance. The switch had been turned off, yes, but on the other side of the switch, there was light. What would you do if you discovered that everything you'd believed your whole life was wrong in the last second of your existence? I want to know your opinion down below. If this journey intrigues you, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the place I went will change everything you think about the end. I was floating, simple as that. One moment I was crushed flesh and bone, and the next I was air, consciousness. I looked down and saw the scene like a silent movie. The red and blue lights of the ambulance painting the rain, the paramedics running, my own inert body being carefully removed from the wreckage, and I felt nothing. No sadness. No loss. It was like looking at a cicada shell abandoned on a branch. That thing down there was no longer me. It had just been my vehicle. It wasn't cold or hot. There was no weight. It was like being a thought. A single thought floating free in space. I had no eyes, but I could see in all directions at once. I had no ears, but I perceived a vibration. A low and deep hum that seemed to come from everything and nowhere. The accident scene began to get small, as if I were going up in an invisible and silent elevator. The city lights became a carpet of jewels, and then just a blur. Then the darkness I knew dissolved, but it wasn't light that replaced it. It was something else. Imagine trying to describe the color blue to someone born blind. It's impossible. I saw colors that have no names, that would make a rainbow look like a black and white sketch. I heard sounds that weren't made of waves, they were made of pure emotion, a symphony of feelings. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. Far from it, I was diving into an ocean made not of water but of lives. Each drop was a soul, a consciousness. And by touching this ocean, I felt everything at once. I felt the pure joy of a child in India getting his first soccer ball. I felt the deep pain of an old man in Japan saying goodbye to his love of 70 years. I felt the peace of a 1,000-year-old tree in the Amazon, the fury of a volcano in the Pacific, the hope of a seed sprouting under the earth. They weren't thoughts. They were pure feelings, without the filter of language. My doctor's brain tried to catalog, analyze, put in boxes. This is mass empathy. This is a synesthetic hallucination. But I no longer had a brain. Logic, my only tool throughout life, was useless here. I stopped trying to understand and just felt. And amid this whirlwind of life, a truth hit me with the force of 1,000 suns. The first great revelation. There was no judgment. There was no bearded God on a throne with a book in hand. There was just understanding. Every action, every mistake, every success of every life, everything fit into a gigantic and perfect tapestry. That emptiness I felt in my silent apartment was a lie, an illusion I'd created myself. I was never alone. None of us ever was. We were the drops, but we were also the ocean. And the force that united all this, the water of this ocean, humans call it love. But the word is too small, it's a joke. It's like trying to carry the ocean in a glass of water. It was the energy of creation itself, the fundamental physics of the universe. The atheist inside me didn't die. He just knelt, amazed. Do you believe we're all connected by an invisible force, or is this just the last dream of a dying brain? Leave your opinion here in the comments. If you've ever felt a connection you can't explain, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because what I discovered about the purpose of it all will change your life. That ocean of consciousness wasn't chaotic. It was the most perfect and complex symphony imaginable. And I, who my whole life had been a single note, a stubborn and lonely C-sharp, suddenly could hear the entire music. I was no longer just my note, I was the complete melody. The I began to dissolve, to unravel in this universal we, and for the first time in my existence I felt at home. The emptiness of my apartment, the silence, all that was the disease. This here was the cure. It was in this state of fusion that I perceived them. They weren't angels with wings or old men with white beards. They were focuses of light. Think of stars, but conscious stars that pulsed with a wisdom and love that would make the sun look like an extinguished candle. They had no form, but I felt their presence around me like a gentle warmth. There were no words. Communication was instantaneous, a direct download to the soul. They didn't tell me things. They made me understand. And the first thing they made me understand was my own life. It wasn't a movie playing on a screen. It was much more intense. I was placed back in every important moment of my existence, but with a crucial difference. I was no longer just Alan. When I saw the scene of Sarah leaving, I didn't feel my own stubborn frustration. I felt her pain. I felt her heart breaking, the loneliness she felt even while lying next to me in bed. I felt every tear she cried in silence so as not to bother me. It was the second revelation, and it broke me into a million pieces. Every act of ours, every word, every silence doesn't die. It becomes a wave that reverberates forever, touching and changing everything around us. My indifference wasn't a shield. It was a weapon. And there I felt the impact of every blow I dealt without even realizing it. Then they showed me more. They showed me the patient who smiled before dying. I felt his peace. I understood that he wasn't delirious. He was seeing this connection, and his smile was one of relief, of recognition. And then they took me to the heart of the matter, to the why of everything. Why does pain exist? Why do separation, loneliness, suffering exist? And the answer came, not in words, but in an overwhelming understanding. The third revelation, the most important of all, the universe, the source, consciousness. It divided itself into billions of pieces, us, so it could experience itself, so that love could be felt, compassion could be learned, courage could be demonstrated. Pain wasn't punishment, it was the necessary friction for the soul to grow. Loneliness was the illusion that made us seek connection. We were all God playing hide and seek with himself, and the goal of the game was simply to remember that we are all one. I felt a love that wasn't human. It was unconditional. A love that looked at all my mistakes, all my arrogance, all my coldness, and said, "It's okay, you were just learning. You were just forgotten." I wanted to stay there forever, to dissolve completely in that light, in that peace. But then I felt a limit. It wasn't a wall or a gate. It was like the edge of a cosmic waterfall. I knew without anyone telling me that if I crossed that veil of trembling light, I wouldn't return. Alan's journey would end forever, and my consciousness would fully reunite with the whole. It was paradise. It was everything I could want, but something pulled me back. A single note, weak but insistent in the symphony. A golden thread that still connected me to the world I had just left. If you had the chance to see your life through the eyes of all the people you've ever hurt, what would you most fear to see? Tell me here in the comments. If you believe there's a greater purpose behind everything, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the reason I was pulled back, that's the most unbelievable part of the story. That golden thread wasn't a memory. It wasn't Sarah's face, nor the echo of some promise I had made. It was something that came from the future. Think about it. If everything is connected, time isn't a straight line. It's a ball of yarn. And for an instant, I felt a pull on a part of that ball that, for me, hadn't happened yet. I saw it not with my eyes, but with my soul, the image of a boy. A kid about 10 years old sitting on a hospital bed, looking out the window with the sadness I knew very well. The same sadness of my empty apartment. I didn't know who he was, but I knew with a certainty that transcended any logic that my journey and his were destined to cross, and that I had something he needed, something no scalpel could give. And that's when the choice became real. The light presences around me didn't force me to do anything. They simply showed me the two paths, as if opening two doors. One door led to that waterfall of light, to complete dissolution, to eternal peace. The end of pain, the end of longing, the end of Alan Carter. The other door led back to my broken body, to a world of suffering and people who didn't remember they were part of the ocean. Going back meant pain, physical and emotional. It meant carrying the weight of this truth in a world that wasn't ready to hear it. For a second I hesitated. Peace was so seductive. But then I saw Sarah's image again, feeling her pain. I saw my patient's smile, and I saw that unknown boy's face. My whole life I'd been a mechanic fixing meat pumps. But there, I understood. The real surgery wasn't on the chest, it was on the soul. And mine finally was beginning. I looked at the door of peace, thanked it, and turned away. I chose pain, I chose return, I chose that boy. The instant my decision was made, a final message was imprinted on my consciousness, not in words but in pure feeling. It was the voice of the universe, of my guides, of God, call it what you will. And it said, "You were a doctor who healed the body. Now be a story that heals the soul. Go and remind them who they are." And then, I fell. It wasn't a gentle return. It was like being sucked backward by a cosmic vacuum cleaner. The symphony of emotions became deafening noise. The indescribable colors funneled into a tunnel of darkness. The feeling of unity was ripped from me, and I was squeezed back into the tight bottle of my own ego. It was the most violent experience imaginable. A headfirst dive from heaven straight into concrete. The first thing I felt was cold, a damp, cutting cold that seeped into my bones. Then came weight, gravity crushing me, trapping me again to matter. And with weight came pain. Oh, the pain. A white and blinding explosion that screamed in every nerve of my body. My chest felt like it was on fire. I tried to pull air, and it was like swallowing glass shards. The sound of the world came back all at once. Sirens, voices shouting orders, the noise of rain hitting twisted metal. I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was the face of a paramedic, young, with eyes wide with panic and determination. His flashlight danced on my face. He was yelling something at me, but I didn't understand the words. I only saw his eyes. And in those eyes I saw a drop of the ocean. A frightened, brave drop, doing its best to save another. And for the first time in my life, lying in a pool of blood and rain, I smiled. Because I no longer saw a stranger. I saw a brother. I was back. If you had to choose between the perfect piece of paradise and a second chance full of pain, but with a clear purpose, what would you choose? Be honest. Leave your answer here in the comments. If this journey made you think, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Because the stories of the lives I touched after coming back, they're proof that we're here for a reason. The first sound I heard wasn't a cosmic symphony, nor the hum of creation. It was the irritating and lonely beep of a heart monitor. Mine. That sound that for 30 years had meant life to me, now sounded like prison bars. The smell wasn't stardust. It was antiseptic and hospital sheets washed too many times. A smell that used to be my perfume, my comfort, and now suffocated me. I tried to breathe deeply, and a stabbing pain like a red-hot knife exploded in my chest. There was a tube in my throat. I was back, and it hurt. It hurt like hell. I opened my eyes. The light was white, artificial, cruel. I blinked, trying to focus, and then I saw her. Sarah. She was sitting in an armchair next to the bed, her head tilted to the side, sleeping. But it wasn't peaceful sleep. Her face was marked by fatigue, her eyes swollen. And even sleeping, I saw worry etched in every line of her forehead. From the other side, I hadn't just seen her pain. I'd felt it. Now back in my body, I only saw the shell, but the memory of that feeling was so alive it cut me. My hand moved, a spasm. The noise of the sheet woke her. Her eyes opened, met mine in the entire universe of relief. Pain and love I had felt in the cosmic ocean was reflected in her gaze. Tears sprouted instantly. "Alan," she whispered, her voice broken. And it was the first time my name didn't sound like a title, but like a prayer. My colleagues came to see me. My former students, now department heads. They looked at me with a mixture of reverence and scientific curiosity. To them, I was a miracle with a capital M, the guy who'd had an aortic rupture at the accident site and survived. They showed me the exams, the tomographies. They talked about accidental therapeutic hypothermia that protected my brain, about 1 in a million chances, and I just nodded, a weak smile on my lips. They were describing the mechanics of rain without understanding what water was. They didn't know it wasn't luck. It was a choice. And while they talked about synapses and brain oxygenation, I remembered the colors they would never see and the music they would never hear. And for the first time in my life, I felt sorry for science. The first big change happened a few days later when they could sit me up in bed. Sarah was there, changing the water and flowers someone had sent. She didn't talk much. I think she was afraid of tiring me, or maybe didn't know what to say to this new man who looked at her differently. I called her, my voice still hoarse. "Sarah," she turned. I looked right into her eyes, those eyes I had stopped really seeing for so many years. "Forgive me," I said. She frowned, confused. "For the accident? Alan, it wasn't your fault," I interrupted her, shaking my head. "No, for everything. For the emptiness. For the silence. For never understanding that the heart that most needed fixing was mine." The water tray fell from her hands, making a metallic noise on the floor, but she didn't care. She just stood there, while the tears she had held for a decade finally collapsed. And I didn't look away. I stayed there, present, for the first time. But coming back was harder than I'd imagined. The world seemed small, noisy. Conversations in the hospital corridor about bills to pay and football results seemed like meaningless background noise. It was like returning from a trip to a place of vibrant colors and landing in a black and white world. And there was something else. I looked at people and saw. I saw the nurse smiling at me, but felt the wave of worry coming from her because of her sick son at home. I saw the physiotherapist helping me walk, but perceived the pang of loneliness he hid. It was as if my experience had left me with a strange sensitivity, as if I could feel the echoes of the ocean within each one. But they were just echoes. And the distance between that echo and the fullness I'd felt was an abyss that caused me physical longing, a pain in the soul. I was lost. I had chosen to come back, but why? The peace on the other side was so infinite. Why did I choose this prison of flesh and pain? I spent nights awake, looking at the hospital room's ceiling, feeling the weight of gravity, the weight of separation. The message from the light guide seemed like a distant dream. Be a story that heals the soul. What bullshit was that? I was just a broken man in a bed. Then one dawn, while the morphine wore off and the pain in my ribs returned to pulse, the image came, clear as crystal. That boy's face, the kid on the hospital bed looking out the window, that golden thread that had pulled me back. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a promise. And suddenly everything made sense. I didn't come back to be the old Dr. Allen. I came back for him. And I knew with every fiber of my patched being that I needed to find him. Have you ever had a second chance in life and felt completely lost, not knowing where to start over? Tell me your story here in the comments. If you believe everyone deserves a new opportunity to find their purpose, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Because the search for that boy and what I discovered along the way is proof that sometimes we need to die a little to learn to truly live. Being discharged from the hospital was like being freed from one prison to enter another. My apartment, once a refuge of silence and order, now seemed like a mausoleum. The white walls, which once represented the clarity of science, now seemed empty of meaning. Every award on the shelf, every diploma on the wall, was a ghost of the person I no longer was. Dr. Alan Carter had died in that car. Who came back was someone else, a stranger wearing my skin, with memories of a place that wasn't on any map. Sarah stayed with me. In the first days, she moved through the house with an almost reverent care, as if I were a glass object about to break. But the change wasn't just in me, it was in her too. One night I was in the armchair watching the rain hit the window, reliving the accident not with fear but with strange gratitude. She approached silently and placed a cup of tea on the side table. She said nothing. She just sat on the floor, rested her head on my knee, and held my hand. The old Sarah would have filled the silence with questions, with worries. The new Sarah, she just felt with me. And in the quiet of that moment, with the warmth of her hand in mine, I felt an echo of that connection, of that ocean. A small, fragile echo, but real. And I cried, not from pain or sadness. I cried because for the first time I was no longer outside the party, I was in it. My old world tried to pull me back. The hospital called. My colleagues wanted to know when the scalpel wizard would return to action. One day I answered. It was Dr. Evans, my former protege. He spoke enthusiastically about a new procedure, a new technique. And while he described valves and sutures, I listened to the music coming from the street. I saw dust dancing in the beam of sunlight entering through the window. I smelled the coffee Sarah was making in the kitchen. And his words were just noise. Evans, I interrupted him with a calm that surprised him. I'm not coming back. There was silence on the other end of the line. Do you need more time to recover? Alan, we saved your place. No, you don't understand, I said, looking at my own hands, which now seemed to belong to someone else. I'm no longer a mechanic. I hung up the phone and knew in that instant that the most important surgery of my life wouldn't be done with a scalpel. That new sense, that sensitivity was a burden. Going out on the street was torture. I'd pass by a crowd and be bombarded, not by sounds or smells, but by waves of emotion. I felt the anxiety of the man running not to miss the bus, the loneliness of the lady sitting on the park bench, the contained anger of the driver stuck in traffic. It was white noise of pain, fear, and hope. It was the ocean, but seen from down here, drop by drop, it was deafening. I understood why we build walls, why we close ourselves off. Feeling everything all the time is too much to bear. And the longing for that peace, that unity, was physical pain. It was like being thirsty knowing there's an entire ocean, but only being able to drink from an eyedropper. It was the boy's image that saved me from going crazy. It became my focus, my anchor in this noisy world. I'd close my eyes and see him. The blue hospital pajamas, the messy brown hair, the way he looked out the window, not with a child's curiosity, but with an old man's resignation. That look, I knew it. It was my look in my apartment armchair. He also felt outside the party, and the message I'd received before coming back echoed in my mind. Remind them who they are. My purpose wasn't to feel the whole world's pain. It was to find that specific drop in the ocean and remind it that it wasn't alone. One night, I told Sarah everything. Everything. The tunnel, the ocean of souls, the light presences, the revelations. I told her about her pain that I'd felt, about my patient's smile, and finally I told her about the boy. I expected her to call a psychiatric ambulance, for her to look at me with pity, thinking the accident had fried my brain. But she just listened, her eyes fixed on mine without blinking. When I finished, silence weighed in the air. She got up, went to the shelf, took one of my Doctor of the Year awards and put it in a drawer. Then she did the same with the others, one by one. Finally, she came back, sat in front of me, and said with the firmest voice I had ever heard from her, "Okay, where do we start looking?" And in that moment, I knew I wasn't crazy, and that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. If you had to abandon everything you'd built, your entire identity, to follow a calling that no one else understands, would you have the courage? Tell me what you would do here in the comments. If you believe our true mission in life sometimes requires us to get lost first, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the search for that boy without having a name, a city, or a clue was the most impossible and miraculous journey a man of science could imagine. The search began, but the truth is the story isn't about finding that boy. The search was just my new scalpel, a tool to keep me present, to make me look at people's faces, not as a set of symptoms, but as a universe of stories. My hands, which once held hearts to cut and fix, now learned the most difficult art of all, just holding another hand, offering warmth and silence. I realized the universe didn't send me back to be a saint or prophet. It sent me back to be human. Really, for the first time, it gave me a second chance, not so I would do something grand, but so I would learn to do small things with great love. The emptiness I'd felt wasn't lack of success, it was lack of connection. It was the disease of separation. And the cure was in every look, in every conversation, in every moment I could see the ocean in someone else's eyes. Science taught me to fix the body, but what I learned from the other side is that the soul doesn't need fixing. It just needs to be reminded. Reminded that it's not alone, reminded that it's part of something infinite and perfect. And all of us somehow can be that reminder for someone. You don't need to die and come back for this. You just need to choose to stop, breathe, and truly see the person in front of you. Maybe your surgery isn't finding an unknown boy. Maybe it's calling that friend you haven't talked to in years. Maybe it's forgiving someone who hurt you. Or, the hardest of all, forgiving yourself. We all have a heart that needs attention. Not the muscle that pumps blood, but the center of our being that yearns for connection. And you? What is the bypass that your soul needs right now at this exact moment? Leave your reflection here in the comments. I'd love to read it. If these stories about what really matters in life touch you, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Because the journeys I'm going to share here aren't just about what happens after death. They're about how we can learn to truly live before it.